And I just wanted to say from the past webinar that we did on the 15th of January, there was a lot of requests for certification. We do not give certification for this presentation. If you want, I can give you a letter of attendance and you could present that to your planning board or your municipality, and perhaps that will they will give you credit in that way. So well, let's get going. So I did weave questions in throughout the presentation that received previously, and then I will, whatever questions I didn't answer throughout the presentation, I will answer at the end. I also have the fabulous J.R. Jacobson to be able to help assist answer questions at the end of the presentation. There will be a hard stop at 11, so I will get going. So thank you for taking the time to learn about these freshwater wetlands, the new way we are regulating them in New York State. I just want to make a note that these regulations were adopted December 31st. So we've only been at this since January 1st. We are building the plane as we are flying it. And we appreciate everyone who's involved, patience with us. But like anything else, there's going to be that's new. There's going to be growing pains, but it's also an opportunity to really figure out how we can collaborate with municipalities better. This is, I like to say, this is a dialogue. We can only go up from here. So,
Chris, I'm so sorry. I'm just going to interrupt
yeah,
you just for one moment. We're just having
sure.
a few folks in the chat that say they don't have sound.
Oh,
I hear you okay. I don't know if people can just give me a yeah, an okay in the So if anyone's having okay, I think we're good on our end. So I'm just going to again reiterate that if anyone has technical difficulties, they can give us a call. So I will write that again in the chat. Thanks, Krista. Sorry for interrupting.
you're welcome. No worries. So today we're going to talk about the Freshwater Wetland Statute, the final regulations, implementation, and general permits.
I'm not sure.
So the statutory provisions, we regulate freshwater wetlands through the Freshwater Wetlands Act, Article 24, that was enacted in 1975. And these regulations got changed, Part 664 in 2022. And so now, starting January 1st, jurisdiction is no longer tied to the maps. We regulate wetlands and an adjacent area. For most wetlands, besides nutrient poor and vernal pools, that adjacent area is 100-foot adjacent area. We regulate larger wetlands, so 12.4 acres and greater. And in 2028, that threshold will drop down to 7.4 acres. And now with the new regulations, we have an opportunity to regulate smaller wetlands. And this is through unusual importance wetlands, and this is by 11 newly formed criteria. So if there's one of 11 criteria on a parcel, then we can say it's jurisdictional and it doesn't matter the size of the parcel. So classification, we classify wetlands 1 through 4. That's still the same as it was, 1 being the most restrictive in the permitting process and 4 being the least restrictive. It's based on remote characteristics. So we use aerial photography, GIS system, to many different layers to determine the classification of the wetland. And it's used in the permitting decisions under Part 663. Like I said, the law changed around Part 664, classification and jurisdiction, not 663, which is the permitting process. So our old maps, they were based on a field visit of each site and taking in consideration the wetland type, the benefits, and the distribution and location. So a cartographer, this is a picture of the old style cartographer just creating those maps, there would be an aerial photo, and they would outline the map. So depending on how hard they pushed with the pen, will give those boundaries. There's variability there. So here is an aerial photo, and you can see how they outlined it. So now this is an old regulatory map, the maps we promulgated from 1975 up on through 95. And then today's technology, you can see the outline of the wetland that is not shaded in, and you can see how much of the wetland is missed. And so I like to say to people, because I know there's a lot of anxiety around losing these maps as a place to go and ensure that there's not jurisdictional wetlands on a parcel or a project site. But we were missing 1 million acres, about 1 million acres of wetlands on the landscape because these maps were so inefficient. And so when you read, DEC regulates 1 million more acres of wetlands overnight, it's not because we created the wetlands. The wetlands were already there. We were not meeting that statutory provision of regulating wetlands, 12.4 acres and greater, since 1975, because these maps were so inefficient. So that is why the need to get rid of the maps. So now we have on the environmental resource mapper these informational maps. So these maps, exactly what I just said, are informational purposes only. They are not intended to determine if there's jurisdictional wetlands on their property. They are intended to use as a planning tool for landowners and project sponsors. If you think of the maps, the informational maps, so when you pull up the ERM, the Environmental Resource Mapper, you'll see in the legend a green box, and it says previously mapped freshwater wetlands. And so those are all the wetlands that were mapped in the regulatory map. So those are definite regulated wetland areas on those green areas. And then the informational layer is the pinkish purple layer. And so that is what we had an MOU with Cornell to create a prediction of the landscape of where these wetlands were that we were missing across the landscape. So it's exactly that. It's a prediction. So you do not want to use this layer in definitive planning tools. And like I was saying, if you think of the maps as one piece of a 500-piece puzzle, jurisdiction puzzle, then that is how we're using it. It's just one way we can check to see if there's jurisdictional wetlands or adjacent areas on the landscape. So a question came in, how often will the data be updated on the maps be updated online? And how definitive is it for an analyst purposes? So I answered the analyst purposes question, but the updating is eventually and regularly we would like to update these maps. First is getting us going with this new program. And like I said, these maps are a prediction of data that we put in, and there's not that much great data. But as we start getting going with this new program, then we can put in more and more data, and then eventually the maps will get there. But again, not definitive. You need to put in a jurisdictional determination request, and I'll get to that, if you want to know for certain if there's wetlands on your parcel or project layer. So let's see, when a parcel is not marked by a green previously mapped or pink info wetland zone on the informational resource mapper, does the applicant owner of the parcel still have to file for a jurisdictional determination? And the answer is yes. And we're also asking to use your discretion. So right, if you are in an upland area and it is not ever known to be wet throughout the year, and you're positive there's not wetlands on that parcel, then you don't need to put in a jurisdictional determination. Again, we don't want to overflood the system with things that are pretty certain not to have wetlands on them. So when you are advising people who are doing projects in your municipality, we're asking, there's a bit of risk assessment, right, and judgment to use whether or not you are going to send people to fill out this jurisdictional request. Will there be a map database overlay available, assuming that new freshwater wetlands will be identified on the ongoing basis? If available, how often might information be recognized? And so, like I said before, the intent is to make them as accurate as possible as we go along. However, it's not going to happen in the immediate future. So just another question about how the maps should be handled. And I think I've kind of beaten that poor dead horse about how they can be handled. So now getting into wetlands of unusual importance. This, like I said, is a way we have the ability to regulate smaller wetlands. And it's if they have one of 11 criteria. So going back to that idea of a jurisdictional puzzle, these wetlands are these 11 criteria are pieces of that puzzle. Now, some of the 11 criteria is so explicit in the statute, we didn't have to define any further. And so you might want to think there's like about 5 of them, and you might want to think of those as like corner pieces. They're solid pieces that we can look at, but then some, and so those are these pieces, so explicit in the statute. And then there's other pieces of the 11 criteria that we had to put, oh, let me go back, sorry, that we had to put more thought into. But to give you an example of one of the pieces that's like a corner piece, an easy piece, is this urban areas. So this is an image of all the urban areas in New York State. This is available on the GIS clearinghouse if you type in urban areas. And there was a question. So there was a couple questions regarding the Adirondack Park and how do the new regulations affect it. So this blue line is the Adirondack Park, and we do not regulate any wetlands within the park. The APA does that, Adirondack Park Agency. But with these new regulations, we are going to now, if there's a wetland within the Adirondack Park that crosses that blue line, because nature does not listen to man-made lines, then we will pick up the regulation on the other side of that blue line. So getting into the UI criteria that we had to do a lot of thinking about, and there's multiple layers to these puzzle pieces. They're not as solid as a corner piece. Let's look at watersheds with significant flooding. So the way we explain this, or the way we were like, okay, how are we going to regulate, first identify, then regulate these watersheds of significant flooding? Well, we took HUC 12 watersheds, and HUC 12 is the hydrologic unit code, and 12 is the smallest of size. And so we looked at HUC 12s that had the following 3 criteria. 1, impervious surface greater than 2%, 2, water storage area less than 5%, or 3, within 4 kilometers of an urban area. So this was our way of looking at runoff, holding water capacity, and human risk. So then to explain even further, because I'm a very visual person, this is factor 1, greater 2% impervious surface, factor 2, water storage, and then factor 3, within 4 kilometers of an urban area. So if you take those 3 criteria and you layer them over one another, this is what it boils down to, all 3 factors. So these are the watersheds with significant flooding in New York State. And again, you can find this on the GIS clearinghouse, and you just type in watershed significant flooding in the search bar. So let's look at productive vernal pools. Excuse me. So it takes, there's some requirements to be regulated, a vernal pool to be regulated. And this is the list. First, it must have wetland vegetation. It must be surveyed, must be productive. So there's a stringent egg mass count. It is in the regs on our website what those egg masses need to be in what parts of the state. In the statute, we are directed to regulate vernal pools that are known to be productive to the department. So Natural Heritage Program did a survey, did a project where they surveyed New York State, all the vernal pools that were on state land, a few private ones that they had permission to be on. And then, so with that project is how we came up with these egg mass counts. And again, those are in the express terms or the regulation terms on our website if you want to know further about that. So it must be documented, must be submitted to DEC, and it must get on a list, and it must be posted on the website. All these things must happen in order for a vernal pool to be regulated. Sorry, I have these Windows things happening on my screen. So now looking at the adjacent area, the regulated adjacent area for a productive vernal pool. I had mentioned earlier that there are two examples where we are two specific types of wetlands where we would regulate more than that 100-foot adjacent area, and vernal pools and nutrient poor wetlands are those two types of wetlands. So if we're looking at a productive vernal pool, and that's that little blue dot in the center, we take the distance and arrangement of that adjacent area based on individual analysis um, and environmental factors. So if you look at this, there's a farm field. So the animals really won't be wanting, so the amphibians won't really be wanting to use the farm field. They'll mostly be using the forest near the vernal pool. So that's the area we're going to pay attention to regulate. And then just because, like I said before, nature doesn't really, listen to our man-made lines. So this nice tidy circle wouldn't necessarily be the case. So this is an image explaining directional vernal pool buffers. So you can see the vernal pools in the center. The habitat that the amphibians would like to use is not this nice circle, but a directional in the direction of where the habitat is to their liking. So we're going to focus our regulation on that. So looking to something important to you guys being from municipalities, regional or local significance. So this criteria, UI criteria, is our way of giving municipalities who want to protect their wetlands extra assistance. And that can happen by getting a critical environmental area for your municipality. And if you get a CEA that specifically references to wetland protection, then that will place that wetland on our UI list. So this is a QR code that's going to take you to the web page that has our standard operating procedures on how we make these jurisdictional determinations. And this is a picture next to it, a table of the CEAs that are in New York State. So if you wanted to look to see what municipalities already have CEAs that reference specifically wetland protection, perhaps your municipality is already on it. Awesome. So now a couple inquiries, and there was a lot of questions about the seeker process and how the seeker process is going to be affected because of these new regulations. And the answer is the seeker process is the same as it was previously. Nothing has changed in the permitting process, only what's jurisdictional. But if you have questions about interpreting the seeker process, then you can reach out to to the Department of Environmental Permits, and you could do that regionally or central office, but that's on our website. And then the question of, what is DEC's expectations of the planning board and planning building staff in implementing these new regulations and, looking for guidance. So the bottom line is you don't have to do anything. There's nothing that's requiring you by law to do something. But I will also say, what is the underlying concern? Because there's usually two. So one is you don't want to do wrong by DEC, and two, you don't want to disadvantage your constituents or your developers. So if you're looking at somebody comes to you with a building request, and that the area is upland, that the area isn't anywhere near a wetland, then you can continue with that building, continue with that project as planned. If you have any question in your mind that there is a wetland near, like I said, the maps are used as a tool, but it's not the end all be all. So if you pull it up on the environmental resource mapper and you don't see a wetland on there, it doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't send that person to get a jurisdictional request. So using discretion here, because also if you send everybody who wants to break ground to us for a jurisdictional request, then we won't be able to handle that, and we will get inundated. And yeah, so like I said, this is a mitigation of risks situation, and we understand the two concerns, not wanting to do wrong by us or disadvantage your constituents and developers. So okay. And then the same answer applies because there is general permits that are up for comment right now. And it's up to you whether you want to hold off if you think those general permits will be really useful in the planning process for the project, or if you want to just move forward with the project. And like I said, this is an opportunity to collaborate with DEC. So getting some information on how we can best set this up together, this framework, while we are gaining operational experience internally and you're gaining operational experience externally. It's a dialogue, it's a conversation that can be had. Okay, so the transition period. This is found in part 664.1 of the statute, applicability. And the proposed regulations include this transition period of 3.5 to 2 years. And if a project before January 1st of this year meets one of the following criteria, so DEC wetlands permit or complete application, a final environmental impact statement or a negative declaration for type 1, and unlisted actions by lead agency, and site plan approval by municipality. So it was a question. Let me just for some clarity about this site plan approval. And it is limited to a formal site plan. Is this limited to a formal site plan reviewed by a town village board or planning board, or are other local approvals included? So it's a formal review. So whether you call it a site plan approval, an approval by a municipality many times is associated with a hearing. So if you meet one of those, then there's extra time for that project. They might meet that requirement. So that's what we mean by it. And there was another question. So, but to get back to that and for clarity, if you're still uncertain, you can contact your region. So requirements for projects approved before January 1st, 2025, but not yet started. So if these projects are approved, if you're in that transition period, but you have not yet started, my advice to you is get going, because depending if it's a major or minor project, you have 3.5 or 2 years to do that project. Okay, extending the adjacent areas. We touched on this a little bit. Nutrient poor wetlands, those are like bogs, fens, seeps, really specialized wetlands that need to be protected. And there's a known list of these in the states, 22 of these very specialized wetlands, and they're like the picture right there. You're not really going to be wanting to develop in it anyway or near it. And so, yeah, that's where we can extend the adjacent area. We can also extend the adjacent area in vernal pools known to be reductive for amphibian breeding. And we protect these. We have this extended adjacent area because we need to preserve and protect these wetlands, these specialized ecosystems. And we do it, like I talked about before, an individual analysis of each nutrient poor wetland and productive vernal pool. So now getting on to the new JD process. Step 1 happens in central office if you want to determine if a parcel or property is within jurisdiction. So you're going to fill out a form online, and that goes into our queue to get reviewed by the central office team. Step 2, if that wetland is determined, or not wetland, if that parcel is determined to have jurisdictional wetlands on it, you will receive a letter of jurisdiction that also has the class of wetland that is on it. And remember, I said we classify wetlands 1 through 4, and this informs the permitting process. So it's important that you get that classification. So now let's say you have your positive jurisdictional letter. Now we have to determine the extent of the wetlands on the parcel or the property. So then you will go to the region, and the region can delineate the wetland, or you can hire a consultant to delineate the wetland for you, and then regional staff will validate that delineation. And then step 3 is determine if the project requires an Article 24 permit, so a project JD. Now, you have your parcel JD, it's a positive, you get your delineation, you know where the boundaries of that wetland is. Now you create your project plan so that you know where your limit of disturbance on your project is going to be. So that's when, this is step 3, this is when we determine if the project requires an Article 24 permit. So maybe your project is nowhere within the boundaries of the regulated adjacent area or the wetland, and so you don't need an Article 24 permit, or maybe it is, and then you do, and then you'll. So this is just the flow chart of what I just said. This is also found on the website. And like I said, that JD will be sent via email on letterhead. And it was a question, why does the DEC request the limits of disturbance be provided prior to the agency's determination of a parcel's protected wetland resources? So we don't, that's in the second part. That's in the project JD and project jurisdictional determination, and not the parcel jurisdictional determination. Let's see. So now this is the flow chart of that project jurisdictional determination. You went through the parcel, you know your parcel has regulated wetlands on it. So now this is how you're going through the project parcel or the project portion. So I'm just going to go back to show you. Green is central office and blue is regional. It just drives home the fact that the parcel JD happens at the central office, project JD happens at the region. And now there is a third option. And there was a question, can you please explain how environmental consultant fits into the flow of regulations? And this is where the environmental consultant would fit into the flow. So this is called a parcel jurisdictional determination consultant option process. And what it is if you have a consultant or environmental consultant working with you, essentially the environmental consultant can go on our website, get our standard operating procedures of how we make these jurisdictional determinations. They come up with, because this is assuming you already know that you have jurisdictional wetlands on this parcel. So you want to skip the JD parcel process and go right to the project. So there's an acceptance of jurisdiction with this option. You're saying, okay, I know I have jurisdiction, so let's just go to the project JD. And the consultant just determines jurisdiction and classification. Now remember, the classification part is an important part because that's going to inform the permitting process, and they can determine that classification based on the standard operating procedures. And then they're also going to delineate the wetland. So then they're going to take this amount of information to the region, and the region is going to validate the delineation and the class. And so maybe maybe it goes to BEH, the regional staff, and they need to do a little change of the delineation or the classification, but it moves around. Oh, my computer is telling me my CPU usage is high. Oh, there we go. I hope that didn't do anything major. So then after the region looks at what the consultant gave them for the delineation and for the class, then they will move to the project. So then the limited disturbance, the project boundaries will be found, and they will move to the project jurisdictional determination. And then the region and the applicant will determine if that project needs an Article 24 permit. Okay, so this is the online jurisdictional determination request form. This is what it looks like on the website. That QR code will take you to our jurisdictional determination webpage. And a question was sent in: how early can you submit a jurisdictional determination request? And as early as you want. When you know you have a project and you want to know, uh, get it in. And then, can you do one for an entire planning area? So I was just confused by what you meant about entire planning area, but the form accepts up to 8 parcels. And if the project spans more than those 8 parcels, you can do it by submitting in 2 requests with all the parcels, or maybe it's even more than 16 parcels. Maybe you have to submit in 3, but that's how you can do it. So when you're filling out your jurisdictional determination request form, allow for pop-ups. The form is dynamic and it changes as depending on what is put in the fields. If you're a landowner, you will need your parcel ID number, physical address, and contact info, whether that contact info is mailing address or email. If you're a private company or NGO, there is a drop down, and I'll show you in the next slide. You'll need the same as above, and shape files are always appreciated, but not required. So this is what I mean by the form is dynamic. When you fill out, this request is being sent by or on behalf of, that's the drop down. And these are the options. So we are considering the private company might have private company / NGO, because that's been a question of a lot of non-government organizations that are doing these jurisdictional requests. Okay. So then when you put in your parcel address, if you get this blue pin and a longitude and latitude, you're good to go. That means we have the information we need to do your request. If you don't get that blue pin, that means something's up with your parcel ID number, and you got to figure that out. Okay, so timelines for JDs. The department has 90 days to provide a parcel JD and 90 days to provide a project JD. If the department fails to provide a definite answer in writing or notification of an extension within 90 days of the receipt of the parcel jurisdiction determination or the project jurisdictional determination, the requester shall make notice of that failure by means of certified mail. And it has to be certified mail, so then we know there's a record of receipt of that, because within 10 days of receipt of that certified mail, if you still don't hear back from us, then that wetland, that parcel in question, shall be not deemed non-jurisdictional for 5 years. So basically, if we drop the ball and you don't get your jurisdiction and you've contacted us with certified mail and you still don't get your jurisdiction, then that parcel is non-jurisdictional for 5 years. So there's a question. It is my understanding that DEC regions will accept a project JD delineation from a certified wetland biologist. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. And what qualifies a consultant as a certified wetland biologist? There are consultants with environmental expertise. If they don't have any environmental background, then they won't be able to look at our standard operating procedures and ultimately and do the work that is necessary. And ultimately, uh, all the work is by these environmental consultants is getting checked by DEC anyways. So yeah, they will know if they're up to snuff or not. So review of jurisdictional determination. So this is an appeal. So first, an initial consultation or delineation. So this is in the field to discuss the parcel in question and why there is a difference of opinion. And then complete a JD appeal application, which is located on our website on that jurisdictional page within 120 days from that initial consultation. So the acceptable basis of appeal is missing technical information, incorrect application of regulatory criteria, or incorrect application of guidance. The department has 60 days to respond. Okay, so now getting into our general permits. So general permits, this is under the Uniform Procedure Act. We do recognize and understand that within a snap of a finger, there's a million more acres on the landscape that we need to regulate, and that will cause some regulatory burden. So looking at general permits as the answer to ease projects that don't have or that have limited impact to the environment and have similar types of work it's similar across the state, then these general permits are ways to ease that regulatory burden. We put out one in December. That's the typical project's general permit. The comment period ended for that one the 27th of January. And QR code takes you to this general permit and explains, what the allowable activities are through this. And it's a 5-year term. So now there are draft permits that were released February 5th, still out for comment until March 14th. That's the electric utility right of way, lake shore lines, modification of management of invasive species, natural gas utility right of way, modification of stream crossings. And there's also, and so this is the QR code that takes you right to these guys. There's also an inquiry about these two. So I just added a little bit more information about the housing development GP and the community scale solar GP. Again, you can get to these by that QR code on the screen. And I'm going to queue up. So, previously sent in questions. I'm gonna slide this. Okay. Um, I just want to make sure you're still seeing my presentation and not my,
Yep, you're good, Krista.
okay, good.
Your owl.
I get, okay, okay. So explain to municipalities how the new DEC regulations relate to the current federal wetland regulations enforced by US EPA and US Army Corps. Many folks think that they now only have to go through this process and are forgetting about federal regulations. It's a two-part question. So to answer that question, so Army Corps and EPA regulate differently than DEC. It's a different set of criteria. And actually, our state regulations are more restrictive than the federal, especially the federal and what the EPA is going through with the navigable waters. That always seems to be getting changed depending on presidency. So if you follow the guidelines of following the state regulations, um, yeah, they're more stringent. Um, so then the next part of that question, can you discuss a scenario where prior mapped wetland or purple polygon may appear within 100 foot of a parcel being submitted for a parcel JD? Will that adjacency kick a positive JD response from a parcel JD submission? And yes, that will, because we regulate that adjacent area. So even if the wetland proper is not on the parcel itself, the adjacent area is. So we would say, in that letter of jurisdiction, we will say, explain that and what class it is. How should realtors advise buyers and sellers? So if you have a buyer and they are selling and it looks to be a lowland area and it seems wet, so even if it's not, again, in the environmental resource mapper, it doesn't have those layers, you still put in a jurisdictional determination just to know as a buyer that, okay, there is this area. I don't want to sell this parcel, sell this property at a disadvantage. Or it's not that it's a disadvantage, but it should be disclosed because they do have to go through some extra steps if they have a wetland on that property. So yes, advising the buyers to just find out for sure if they have wetland on their property. And the same thing for the sellers, like let the sellers, because all buyers, might not do the right thing and disclose. So advise your sellers to put in, if there's a property that they want and there looks to be some wet area or lowland area on there, just to be safe, put in a jurisdictional request. And then, so for that realtor on the line, I am creating a training program for realtors. And Vermont has one. I'm working with Vermont's coordinators to get New York State to have one. So there will be more information coming. And how will regional delineations be coordinated with Army Corps of Engineers if necessary? So we've always coordinated with the Army Corps. This is no different with these new regulations. And then 2, is a negative project JD required where a consultant delineation marks the boundary a far distance from the project work? And then, so assuming that the regional office is good with that boundary, this is a project JD process. Could the municipality require a non-jurisdiction from DEC? Yes. And so it depends on what the town wants. So new septic design permitting. Will every new system require a general permit? No, if it's not in a wetland or a regulated adjacent area, it will not. And then sorry if I I have a swamp wetlands less than 2 acres that is connected to a larger piece of wetlands. What am I allowed to do without getting a permit? Well, the first step is to know if it's even regulated. So 2 acres, right? We regulate 12.4 and greater, but 2 acres could be regulated depending if it has one of the 11 UI criteria. So put in a jurisdictional request and then you will understand if you have. But if it is regulated, then you can go on the website. There's a list of regulated activities and not regulated activities under the freshwater wetlands permitting. Just put that in our little search bar. Do all projects with land disturbance require a parcel JD? Or is it just projects that are near a water source? So like I said before, not all projects that are disturbing the land will require this JD, and you need to use your judgment. Upland, so thinking of as super dry, upland, we're good. This part of my property has always been wet, especially in the spring. Let's, think about how you're going to move forward, putting in that JD. Is there any mechanism to provide for an offset if a wetland is identified in an urban setting and the area is needed for a development? Can new wetland be established? Is there a fund that can be contributed to help manage and preserve more prominent wetlands? With no size limitations, the wetlands that could potentially be identified within urban areas could impose challenges for new development in areas where the development is most appropriate because of services and utilities. So in our regulations or statute, we're charged to, we follow these: avoid, minimize, and mitigate. So that would land in to the mitigation. So first, we want to make sure you avoid, if you can at all, to avoid the wetlands in the adjacent area. If you cannot avoid and it has to be in the wetland and the adjacent area, then we try to minimize those effects. And then thirdly, if it has to be done, then that is where mitigation comes in. And that is all having a meeting about the permitting process with your regional BH and permitting staff. Okay, are there authorized activities for maintenance work in wetlands, regulated adjacent areas that do not need a permit? It depends on the maintenance. So ordinary maintenance do not. So replacing windows, fixing a shed, mowing the lawns, things like that, that's exempt. But for the things that are not exempt, there is the general permit that came out in December, and that will do a lot of maintenance type work. When do municipalities need to require that the applicant for a project perform a JD, and how to navigate seeker during that process? Okay, so we talked about using discretion and knowing when to send an applicant to get a JD, but not on every project that disturbs the land. And so, it's a mitigation of risks. And we talked about how seeker the process is not changed at all. Will there be a GP specific to municipal non-New York State DOT highway work? The answer to that is maybe. We're using these permits to, move things, not inhibit construction and development. Please discuss how to address a small project. So like a swimming pool or an accessory structure intended to be constructed on a parcel that is known to not have wetlands, but the project area or structure would be within 100-foot buffer of the wetland located on an adjacent but off-site parcel. So we talked about this a little bit, so that it is in the adjacent area. So that will kick on the JD, that will kick a jurisdiction. The tricky part is it's on the wetland itself, is on a parcel that is not the landowner. So we need to have permission from the landowner to delineate. So we don't want to trespass. So if we get permission, great, we can delineate that wetland and know exactly where the boundaries are. If we don't get permission, then we have to do it through air interpretation, do it from aerial photographs. And I mean, it's still a way to do it. It's not being boots on the ground, but also know that this does not happen frequently or has not happened frequently. How will private landowners determine, there we go. Sorry, I'm just scrolling down. How will private landowners determine if projected wetlands are located on their properties? How will private landowners determine the boundaries of a protected wetland located on their properties? Will there be staff at DEC regional office to help landowners for informational and technical assistance? So that yes, regional staff is available, so am I. But also, like I said, use that discretion, put in it, if you want to know for certain, put in that jurisdictional request form. And it also asks, will paper copies of Article 24 and the amended parts of 664, 663 was not amended, that's in the question. So it's just amended parts of 664 be available to the public. And I'm going to answer that with a question. Do you think there's a need? Because it's all available on the website at the moment. And we totally could print off a bunch of these, but also we are charged with conserving the environment, and I don't want to print off a ton of copies of things if they're not going to be used. But if they're going to be used, awesome. We will do it. Specific detailed responsibilities of code enforcement, and how do we avoid the liability of perceived grievances due to the necessary delay in approving building permits. Like I said before, no legal responsibility from Article 24, but understand the moral responsibility of not wanting to hold up people's plans. And that's where it's your call. But if every building permit you get, you ask for a JD, we can't keep up with the volume of that. Okay, I keep moving my mouse around, so I'm like, where is it? Will a municipality that is entirely an urban area need to enforce any of this? If yes, how? So there's two parts of this question, right? If you're asking if a municipality will have to enforce any of that. And so, no, you don't have to enforce anything. It's a state-run program, so the municipality does not have to do it. But then there is the question if it's entirely in an urban area. So if there is no, I think that they might be asking here, if there's no wetlands on the landscape, would you be having to deal with this new regulation? If there's no wetlands on the landscape, no. Let's see. Review the status of the vernal pools. We talked about that. Please, and this is the last one, and then we have 5 minutes for questions. Please explain if stormwater recharge basins are included in the definition of regulated freshwater wetlands. So perhaps, I will give you an extreme example. There's a stormwater basin that's never been maintained, and in the interim, there's threatened and endangered species that have moved in. Well, now, yes, we will regulate that wetland. But if there's a stormwater basin that's been maintained and over the course of like one season, 2 plants moved in, we're not going to regulate that. Engineered plans are usually not going to be regulated. Okay. That is the questions. And here's my information. I want to open it up for at least a few questions before we get off.
Okay, Krista, so we've had quite a bit, and we're obviously not going to get to them all. So I just want to let folks know that we will make sure to save the chat, and we could send them to Krista and her team afterwards. So if she needs to follow up with you, she can.
Yes. Oh, and there's JR. Here, how about this, JR? I will just throw them at you.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Nope, JR, I think you're muted.
Yeah, we couldn't hear you. Gee.
Not hearing you, JR.
Oh no.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. There's a click thing. Yeah, I was just going to say that there's a lot of questions that were in the chat that I was trying to start to respond to, and then I couldn't get ahead of them, and there were a lot that I knew Krista, you were going to cover in the presentation. So they were coming fast and furious. All good questions, and you know that liability piece was the one thing that I know is a concern for the municipalities. You know, and the idea that, you know, if they make a bad call, what happens there? Well, we're not lawyers. You know, as Krista said, you know, there's nothing in Article 24 that requires, you know, municipalities' engagement in this. You know, the question that I had when as people were looking at that was, what happens now with Army Corps wetlands? Because we're not requiring Army Corps, you know, to give a jurisdictional determination in every one of those cases, and they're doing the same thing. There's, you know, federally regulated or state regulated ones, and so, you know, I guess my point is that municipalities are making a determination at this at a point to say, yeah, what's the likelihood here? And as Krista said, you know, there's you know, a risk assessment there, and you know, if you're on the side of a mountain, okay, there's probably not a wetland there, you know, but if you have other mapping, you know, the informational maps, when you put all that kaleidoscope of colors on the ERM together and you look at things, you know, is there a bigger likelihood that there'd be something there, and that's how I think we recommend folks to kind of use those maps to kind of get that, you know, to reduce that risk. So anyway, that's that was one thing that was coming through, Krista. I don't know if we got 2 minutes, so yeah,
I
it's
know.
it's tough to to pick a question or two.
I'm trying to expand, especially when my chat box won't get bigger than one chat at a time.
You know, I can say as you're looking, we really do appreciate the engagement here, and you know, in the municipalities. And part of the thing in Article 24 was to expand the collaboration or the interaction between the department and local municipalities. That's where, you know, that one's UI criteria that deals with CEAs or critical environmental areas. That's a place for municipalities and the department to kind of work together to protect wetlands in their communities. So, you know, there was a goal here to do just this, to kind of get more interaction. And and as Krista said, there's a lot going on here. We're doing our best. We are being transparent where we can, but we're building something different than what we had before. So be patient with us. You know, we are listening to all the questions, and we're trying to you know, solve concerns and problems as we're going. But there's an awful lot of you know, pieces in this puzzle.
Yeah. So most of the questions, you know, have been answered a little bit, but what about this one? Is a landowner required to place a hardscape fence or rock between permitted use and an adjacent area and wetland to prevent encroachment?
There's no requirement there. You know, we regulate the actual encroachment. There are times when we do permitting. So if someone is putting in a development and they're putting in something, you know, say a lawn within 100 feet, there may be a requirement in that individual permit to put some sort of demarcation, whether a fence or rock wall or whatever it is. But bar that in a permit condition, there's no requirement for anybody to do that.
And I will say, you know, with site specific things, because I see a few of these in the questions, site specific, it's a dialogue, because we need to know exactly what's happening. So strike up that dialogue with your region. They will be able to answer, you know, a little bit more. And sorry, I'm reading at the same time, but yeah.
You know, Krista, this is sort of the beginning of a dialogue. Your job
Yeah.
is to
Well,
interact with everybody, which is great. You know, and so, you know, there'll be more opportunities for folks to ask questions and get them answered. And as we move forward, the website will contain more information. You're
yeah.
working on outreach materials. I'm so glad you're working with us and doing all of this, because there's so many other folks who just aren't the public face of this. So, you know, thank you.
You're welcome. And to follow up with that, I mean, it is 11:01. I'm not doing a bunch of webinars. I am doing some in person here or there, but now my gears are shifting to try to making that more tangible resources. So then, you know, there will be, like JR said, more of an ability to find the answers you need with just a click of getting on our website. Okay, so because it's 11:02, I say we'll save these questions. I can go through them more thorough without a tiny little screen on my screen. And I am dangerously close to the first Q&A, so that will be on the website. And these, again, it's going to just be updating the Q&A, because as we get more operational experience, there will be more answers from the inside, questions from the outside, and I really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen in and provide us feedback. We do really appreciate it. So thank you, Emma.
Thanks, Krista. And have a good one, everyone. And we will post that at this recording onto the website. I put it into the chat. I'll do it once again for folks if they missed the audio. Sorry about that. I know that was a little bit funny. I don't know why there was some issues, but hopefully you could view those first 15 minutes if you missed it. But with that, I will make sure to save all of your questions and send them over to the Wetlands team. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks.